Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jeffrey Olson, and I'm here with my son, Spencer Olson. And many of you know our story, but we're going to take a little bit different approach tonight. We're going to be talking about the same road, but two different experiences. Now, I am a near-death experiencer. I've had near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, shared death experiences, after-death communication experiences. And Spencer, my son, has a different road than that to go on. And I'm just going to share my screen for a moment as we go through this. So there's our names, and you can certainly see that. We want to share tonight in a very open way, and if you have questions, certainly put them in the chat and we can go that way. But I'm going to let Spencer introduce himself a little bit too. I think most of you know me, but Spencer, why don't you just tell everyone about yourself a little bit?
So my name is Spencer, as you heard. And of course, we're talking about the same road, but two experiences. And my dad, of course, had a near-death experience. We both were in a tragic car accident. And, you know, we went through the same thing, but we definitely had our own experiences. I did not have a near-death experience, or I guess I did come near death, but it was not the same as my dad's. So we're here to talk about just our different experiences, but the same event. So
awesome. And it's been many years ago. Spencer was only 7 years old at the time, so he was just a child. He was just a little boy, and the crash was a family road trip. We were all in the car. I was driving, my wife was in the passenger seat, and Spencer was in the seat behind me. And my youngest son, Griffin, just a toddler, was in the seat next to Spencer. We were going up the interstate. I had the cruise control set at 75 miles an hour. And it was interesting as we drove because I noticed things. I happened to glance in the rearview mirror at one moment. I just glanced and saw my toddler Griffin sleeping in his car seat. And it's interesting because there's just a moment about that. But there was profound gratitude in these things. Now we're gonna be pretty brief today because we've got a lot to talk about. If you want to see more of the story, Fox Nation has just released a segment with the Ainsley Earhart show called Beyond and Back. Our episode is Soul Survivor. So take a look at that and you'll get more details, also including the ER doc that was involved in our experience in the accident. But that might be a way to get a little bit more than we're going to share tonight. But let me just take you there for a moment, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what I experienced. Spencer will talk about what he experienced with the crash, the hospital, the aftermath, and then life beyond that. And we're also going to share a children's book that we have co-written and put together for all those children who have had loved ones pass and are looking for answers. So that day, driving up the interstate, 75 miles an hour, I'm looking in the rearview mirror, and it's a moment, it's a glance, you know, just checking traffic, and I see my youngest son, just a toddler at the time, 7. This, you know, 7-year-old, this handsome lad was just a child behind me. And there was this moment of gratitude where I noticed things. It's like time stopped. And I noticed how long my youngest son's eyelashes were. I heard Spencer playing with action figures behind me, and I was filled with all this joy of a father, like, wow, look at these kids, you know, look at these beautiful boys. And then my wife had reclined her seat, and she was sleeping. She was sound asleep, but she was still holding onto my hand, which I found really cool. After 10 years of marriage and raising these boys, she was still holding my hand. And that was just in a second of glancing in the mirror, but there was these things that will forever be burned into my consciousness in hindsight. The hardest part of the story to tell, perhaps, is what I believe happened is I may have dozed off at the wheel. I may have just nodded off. I know I swerved to the right, I overcorrected to the left, and the car began to roll. Not off the road, but down the road at 75 miles per hour. I blacked out for most of that, but when the car came to a stop, the first thing I heard was Spencer crying in the back seat as a 7-year-old child. And I thought, I've got to get to him. I've got to get to my son. But that's when I realized that I could not move. I was pinned either to the floorboard or the seat. I couldn't tell. There was the rancid smell of gasoline, all the broken glass. And I was unaware of my injuries. What had actually happened is both of my legs were crushed and shattered. My left leg was amputated above the knee. My back had been damaged. My rib cage had been damaged. My lungs were collapsing. My right arm had almost been torn off, and then the seat belt had cut through me and ruptured all my intestines. I didn't realize that. All I knew is my son was crying and I had to get to him. But that's when I realized that no one else was crying. And it was in that darkest moment, that pure hell, that a very interesting thing happened. I knew that Tamara was deceased. I knew that Griffin was gone. I knew that Spencer was okay, or seemed to be okay. He was banged up a bit, but I wanted to get to him. And I felt light come. I mean, here I was in this panic, this tragic, I can't explain the horrible hell that was for me in that situation. But light came and it seemed to surround me, and I seemed to be rising above the accident scene. I share this for a specific reason too, because if we've had loved ones pass, and if indeed my spirit was leaving my body, it was the most natural thing ever. Many could say I died a violent death. I mean, that was a horrible situation, and it was, but the passing seemed to be a deliverance from it all. And the interesting thing is, as that happened, and I'm in this bubble of light, if you will, Tamara, my wife, who I knew was deceased at the scene, suddenly she's there with me. And she's beautiful. She's very much alive, but she's emphatic that I've got to go back. You've got to go back. You can't come. You can't stay here. You've got to go back. And we literally had a conversation about the fact that I was to come and raise this young man. We talked about if I went with her, he'd be orphaned. And we literally made a choice. And I made the choice to return, wherein I said the most profound goodbye I'll ever say. And then I found myself wandering around a hospital with all the doctors and patients and nurses. I have no concept of time in this bubble of light and this goodbye. I later found out that people arrived at the scene. I had to be extricated from the car. Spencer was banged up, but he was okay. He physically, walked away from the accident, so to speak. They rushed us to a local hospital, but had to air med me to a level 1 trauma center. Spencer was also flown in with me or to a children's hospital in the same city. I was unaware of any of that. All I knew was I had crashed the car. I'd said the most profound goodbye I would ever say. And then I was wandering through the hospital, seeing people in a profound way, and finally came up on a body that I didn't feel anything from, which I thought was odd, and stepped closer, realizing it was me, or that was my body. I was having this profound connected experience, but I had to get back in the body. And that was my experience, the crash, but this profound out-of-body experience, this near-death experience. And I had others. I was in the hospital for almost 6 months. I had 18 surgeries putting me back together. But I want to set that up as a contrast, because Spencer, who was only 7, had a much different experience. He didn't leave his body or anything else. He was there as a little boy, probably thinking the whole family was gone. But I'm going to let him talk about what he was experiencing while I was having this profound near-death or out-of-body experience.
So back to the little kid who's thoroughly engaged in a lightsaber fight. with his action figures. So of course I was busy playing and not necessarily so engaged in that I wasn't in the moment until I heard my mom scream out, "Jeff," and that's when I remember the car starting to flip, and of course it flipped down the road 8 or 9 times, and I just, I'm sure the shock helped, but I just remember describing it as a kid, just getting really boxed up. I kind of felt like I was getting beat up is how I would describe it. I'm sure at that point that was probably the most pain I had ever felt or would feel at that young of an age. But it wasn't too bad, I suppose, in retrospect. But as soon as the car came to a stop, I remember being panicked and calling out for my dad. And I couldn't really get a sense of what else was going on around me. I wasn't too, maybe there was a reason that I was being held from seeing, my brother that had been ejected from the car, or my mom. But soon after, there was people that arrived on the scene, and they pulled me from the car and kind of did the basic thing of how many fingers am I holding up? What's your name? What's your address? And at that point, I did see my mom hanging out the window of the car, and she had some blood in her hair, and I just remember seeing that, and I think just as anyone who goes through something as traumatic as that, they don't fully understand what they're seeing, unless they do, but I remember seeing that and just kind of acknowledging it, but not really, probably not handling it yet, not dealing with it. And at that point, I kind of would describe my side of the story as maybe kind of being alone, kind of walking the path by myself. Because from there, my dad and I were both extricated from the car, but we, at that point, he was kind of out for the count. I don't know if I had any concept of who was alive or who was dead. I think I was just so in shock I didn't really know. But I know we were both in the ambulance, and they took us to a nearby hospital, and then we were life flighted from there. But even at the hospital, I remember I wasn't in a room with my family. Just kind of as a 7-year-old kid, I'm just all by myself. And, I think that's just how a lot of people who go through trauma, what they experience is, I guess it sucks to go through trauma either way, but a lot of people, what makes it even more traumatic is they do it on their own. Because I remember, there's people that would come in to visit me. They had some like missionaries come in and give me a blessing and stuff like that, but they were all kind of strangers. There was no people that I had a familiarity with. But yeah, so we were at that hospital for a little bit, and then we got life flighted into Salt Lake City. And finally at that point, I had some family members come in and see me. And so I kind of had a little bit of some people I knew, some familiarity. But at the same time, they didn't really understand, or at least I don't think they did, because it was my experience. And as much as they could say, we're sorry, we're so sorry, they didn't really know because they hadn't gone through it. But as far as injuries were, my dad had some pretty bad injuries. He was in the hospital for about 6 months or so. I was in there for a week with some broken ribs and a broken arm, and then I recovered and went to stay with some family. But again, I was, I had dreams where, my mom and dad would get in a red Corvette and take off in the sunset and just leave me. And what a perfect metaphor for, what a perfect way to try and paint a picture of what I was going through, a way to kind of articulate what a 7-year-old wouldn't be able to. But at that point, I was still kind of alone, and I was just waiting for my dad to get out of the hospital and kind of join me on our journey, and thankfully he did. But it was hard.
Yeah, it was difficult. And let me be clear. The accident happened 24 years ago. I couldn't speak of it for a decade. I would just cry. I couldn't talk about it. But you can begin to maybe get in touch with this conversation I was having with Spencer's mom, who had passed, and she's saying, you got to go back. You got to go back. We can't have that little boy left all alone. And he was alone in that situation. And yet here I was having this profound out-of-body experience, realizing, hey, wow, I'm very much alive, even though I've left the body. I'm very much connected to people I love, and then coming back in. The hospital for me was hellacious. You know, Spencer was released and was staying with his uncle, my younger brother, and he had good cousins there, and I was very glad for that. The door never really shut for me. In the hospital, I mean, doctors and nurses would come in and I could feel them. I would feel their soul. I could feel, there was a knowing, there was a veil lifted. There was something where I felt things that I had never felt before. And yet no matter what I was feeling, I was seeing them in pure love and magnificence. The judgments and comparisons seemed to just go out the window. One of the most profound things in the hospital may have been at the end of my hospital stay. And keep in mind, I'm experiencing these things as a grown man and a father. Spencer, as a little boy, isn't experiencing any of this. But at the end of my hospital stay, I had been, gosh, I'd been in ICU. I'd been through surgical recovery. I was actually in the rehabilitation wing. And I had laid so long on my back, I had rubbed all the hair off the back of my head. And I was still in such deep grief over what had happened, and particularly worried about Spencer too, how I was going to take care of him and what was going on. But as I drifted into sleep that night, I felt that same light come, that light like at the accident scene. And I felt like I was rising above the hospital bed. And at this point, however, the light seemed to dispense. It seemed to go away, and I was in the most beautiful place. And I began to run. Now, I don't run in this realm with one leg and the other one that's got 6 pins and a plate holding it together. But in that realm, I ran, and it was so physical. In fact, it was beyond physical. It was almost sensual. I could feel the energy of the ground beneath my feet. I could feel the intelligence firing through my legs as I ran about. And, you know, people say heaven or the other side or the spirit world. To me, there's only one word that comes close, and that is I was home. I was home. And as I ran about thinking, wow, I'm home and released from this, you know, pain and trauma of my body again, I got the message there that I wasn't there to stay. And I knew intuitively I was to go down this corridor. There was a corridor to my left, and I began to work down the corridor. And as I did, I encountered a crib. And I raced to the crib, and in the crib was my little toddler son that had been killed in the accident. And he was perfect. He was just sleeping peacefully, and I picked him up and I held him, and that was very real. I mean, there's the weight and the heat of picking up a child, and I held him against me, and I could feel his breath against my neck, and I leaned over and I smelled his hair, and I knew it was him. And as I held him, I felt this intense presence coming behind me, this overwhelming presence. And I grew up in a conservative Christian home. I thought, wow, that's God. And I began to have guilt come up. I was fearful. I thought, wow, my little boy's here because I crashed the car. You know, his life was cut short because I lost control or dozed off, and the guilt began to bubble up. And I had the thought, I hope there's some way I can be forgiven. That was my thought. And as I thought that, and this almost felt physical too, I felt these arms wrap around and hold us. And then there was the download of, gosh, just truth, peace, love, the life review. You can get knowing, and I've outlined that in the book in great detail. But the bottom line is, I was given a choice. I could be mad at the divine because of what happened. I could beat myself up the rest of my life over guilt because I was driving the car. Or I was given a choice where I could give my son away. I could hand him over and exercise my will in the situation. It's interesting, given my upbringing, I always thought my will, I thought it was your will be done. And this loving being that held me said, your will is my will. That's how much we love you. And in all that love and all that peace, I was able to kiss my little boy and pass him over, give him back in trust. And then I woke up to the hospital bed, back to the, the amputation and the injuries and the colostomy bag and all the physical things that I was dealing with. But I had exercised some will in it, and I had a little different perspective. Now, it isn't that I grieved any differently than anyone would. I still struggled for years. You never get over it. You get used to it, I suppose. But I did have different perspective based on that. However, Spencer had had none of that. Here I had had the near-death or out-of-body experience to say goodbye to my wife, to kiss and hand over my youngest son. And Spencer had lost everything I'd lost. He had lost a mother, he had lost a brother, and in many ways had lost his father. And he didn't have those opportunities. So, touch on that a little bit. I mean, what was, I know how I got through it, and it was part of the near-death experience that probably carried me through. But did you have coping mechanisms, or how did you navigate that while I was laid up in the hospital?
Well, and I'm not sure I had the capability to deal with it at the time. I think living with family was a good distraction. But especially within, the 6 months thereafter, I had horrible nightmares. And I kind of had the accident replay for me on repeat some nights. And, I don't think I really was able to deal with it. I think maybe having a religious background to it and being told that, they're on the other side, or they're in a better place, or things like that, kind of put a Band-Aid on it. But I really don't think I was able to deal with it. Well, if you can even deal with it, but I wasn't even able to face it until I was much older and got into my teen years. I think I was able to just kind of put a Band-Aid on it and put it on the back burner until I was ready to really take a look at it.
Yeah, it's quite a journey, and there's not a lot of time to cover it. I mean, sometimes it's just one day at a time. Sometimes it's just getting to the next breath. Just take another breath and get through it. It was interesting coming home, getting into the aftermath of the accident. And I wasn't even going home at first. I was going to stay with my brother where Spencer had been, because I still had home health. And my brothers were incredible. I mean, they about lost their jobs to come in the hospital and sit with me and look out for me. And here they were looking after my son. They came to get me to bring me home, and I was in a wheelchair. My left leg was chopped off. My right leg was in a brace. My right arm was in a sling as they worked on the shoulder, and they would literally have to lift me up and put me in the wheelchair. And I'll never forget when they came to get me from the hospital, and they had to lift me into the car and put the wheelchair in the back. And then when we got to the house, they had to lift me out and put me in the wheelchair. And here I saw Spencer, looking out the window, watching as his uncles, my brothers, lifted me, his dad, out of the car and put me in the wheelchair. And I kept thinking, how's he ever going to accept this? How's this ever going to work? I'm this crippled father, it was never going to be the same as it was before. And I was so worried about him accepting me. And he was watching as his uncles put me in the chair, and I began to navigate my way to the front door. It was a little electric wheelchair that I could drive. And he came running out of the house, and he ran toward me, but then he ran right past me. And I thought, I knew this was going to be hard. It's just the colostomy bag and all this is too much for him to deal with. And I continued to navigate to the house. And when I turned the wheelchair, from the car to go up the ramp, I noticed what he had actually done is he'd run across the street, and he was knocking on all the neighbors' doors. And he was saying, come out, my dad has made it home. Come see my dad. And he eventually did come and throw himself on my lap, which just about killed me because I still had all the sutures down my down my abdomen. And he threw his arms around my neck, and I began to weep. And I said, it's going to take me a while to get better. And he was a Star Wars nut. He still is, but I said, they're going to get me a cool Darth Vader leg. They're going to, I'm going to work really hard to get well. But I said, are you going to be okay with this? And he said something we still laugh
Kids
about.
say the damnedest things.
They do say. He said, Dad, if you were nothing but a puddle of blood, I would still love you. And I share this for a specific reason. I mean, I burst into tears and I held my son, and here's what I realized. Suddenly in a wheelchair, holding my surviving son, was no less divine than being in those other realms holding my son who had passed. Heaven was right here. There was nowhere to go. There was nothing to become. It was simply to be in that moment, and to be in that perfect moment, feeling the unconditional love of a child, which was every bit as powerful as the unconditional love I had felt from the divine. And that shifted some things. I realized that, wow, life is a miracle, and life is a gift, and every moment is sacred to be relished. And Spencer was my greatest strength, going through all that. He was so good to me as a youngster, and he'd run and get things for me, and we would go through it, and miracles happened. I mean, I say we had angels. I know we have two guardian angels, even though Spencer may not have had those experiences, and yet he did have little things happen. My brothers were angels. The neighbors were angels sometimes, but we had a particular angel years, after the accident, and that's my current wife, Tanya, who came into the picture and not only became my wife, but became Spencer's mom. And she seemed to be able to put the pieces back together. And I mean, the whole point of this is the contrast of our experiences. I had profound out-of-body near-death things. Spencer didn't, but somehow we've come to the same conclusion in the end. Tanya came in, we began to rebuild the family. We adopted two boys. I don't call them my adopted boys. They're just my sons. And we've had a profound path. But Spencer, I think, is an older soul than me. I think he agreed in some soul group somewhere that he would come and walk with me, even if I limp, and walk me home, walk me through it, be there as a strength to me. And Spencer's aftermath has been interesting too. And I mean, gosh, he's married. We've got Ashley here with us. Talk about your aftermath, or your adult years a little bit.
Well, and I just wanted to add that, if it wasn't obvious enough, when my dad came home, I was so excited to see him, and I had the reaction that I did because, in a sense, I was no longer alone. My family that I thought had left me, or had gone, I still had a piece of my family. So we shared this experience. It's made us stronger for sure. But I don't know. I think we're kind of each other's heroes in this, because I don't know where either one of us would be if we didn't have each other to kind of walk each other. I don't know if it might be a bit of the blind leading the blind, but at least we had somebody to lead. We were able to lead ourselves. But I mean,
yeah.
Like I said, it was a while until I was able to really even try and deal with it. For a while, I kind of had that band-aid of just maybe belief and acceptance, and just thinking, okay, like I'm over it. I can move on now. Like, I know everything happens for a reason. It's okay. And it was hard. There was Mother's Days, especially before my dad met my stepmom, where, all the kids would make something for their mom, and, I didn't really have anyone to make it for. And again, part of that being alone, no one, even though my dad was back, I was in a sense alone, because everyone kind of, living their normal cookie cutter lives didn't understand what it was like to have lost someone, or I assumed, and so it was hard, but I kind of just put a Band-Aid on it and kept moving. And it was only later that I realized that, with anything horrific like this, it takes a while to heal, and you may never be healed. But it's kind of like, it's not about the destination, it's the journey. It's just how you take it day by day. And you can see just kind of how you evolve and change as a person. And for me, it's just about speaking about it and being able to talk about it, because I think there is healing in that. Not being closed off about it, but actually being able to talk about what happened. But for me, I mean, you know, I didn't have any grandiose experiences, but I kind of just came to the conclusion through, you know, just different trainings or seminars, and just learning and reading different things, that I kind of came to the conclusion that, you know, we're all human. I'd be no different than anybody else if I was born into their body and had the events and circumstances that happened to them happen to me. And that's how I kind of look at this. And, you know, our overarching theme, you know, the same road, but two different experiences. I think we're all on this road of life, and we all experience it through our own mind, our own body. But we're all the same. We're all human. You know, we all feel emotions. We all go through hard times, and we all experience joy and good times as well.
Thanks for doing that. I mean, I always say, well, gosh, I had these profound experiences and Spencer didn't. But the beautiful thing is there's so many. You know, we come to a IANDS conference, you know, and it's all about the near-death experience, and the International Association of Near-Death Studies, and it's all about the near-death and the out-of-body and these profound things. And when I say that Spencer didn't have those experiences, you did have little things happen. And I think those little things are what becomes the big things. And it wasn't until later in life, maybe, that you touched on that, but you had a dream when you were a young adolescent. Well, tell us about that a little bit.
I'll talk about that. And also I wanted to say, you know, I was always looking for experiences like my dad's, you know, to have something so visceral and real. And really, you know, what it is we all have our own experience, and no one can experience it for us. We can try and use words to communicate with other people what it's like for us, but we can't ever really know anyone else's experience but our own. And so for me, it was stopping, you know, looking for something as grandiose as my dad's experience, and being able to acknowledge the you know, the little synchronicities in my life. I mean, there's times that I had some pretty profound experiences and then kind of just chalked it up to, you know, just a dream, or just me wanting to have some experience that would make it okay. But I mean, yeah, when I was about 13 or 14, I had a really impactful, vivid dream that I still remember. And, you know, basically in that dream, my mom came to me, and without using any words, just kind of communicated the message to me that, you know, she loves me and she's always going to be kind of right beside me, and that no matter how the world judges me or what I may think of myself and judge myself to be lesser than, all I can do is do my best and just be who I am, and try not to be someone or something else that other people want. And of course, you know, like I said, I kind of discredited that and said, well, that was just my self-conscious, you know, creating that, and, you know, whatever, what if it was, you know, it was something real for me. And it is a message that I always try and live by, and remember that, you know, I'm loved, and we're all loved, and we all have like a spark of divinity in us that makes us unique, and shouldn't try and be anyone else but ourselves. So that's all we can do.
I love that. And it is those little things. I mean, it's in the little things that become big things. You know, sometimes, gosh, just taking a walk, watching a sunset, that's, you know, that's the beauty in life. It's the beauty in life. Ashley, will you just come peek in? Ashley's sitting here. Come peek in with us. Just come say hello. I mean, like I said, actually it was many years ago. Spencer is the age now that when his mother, Tamara, passed away. This is Ashley. This is our beautiful daughter. This is Spencer's wife. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I had all sons. And so it's lovely to have a daughter, and thank you for being here and for shepherding Spencer through, because you don't get over it, and there's healing that has to take place. And I don't know, do you have anything you want to share or talk about?
Well, I guess one thing that when I was dating Spencer, we were driving home from St. George, and I had this moment where Spencer looked over at me and I was just crying, and he's like, "What is wrong?" And I told him,
break up with me.
no. And I told him, I just felt your mom just showed me how much she loves you. Like, I just like it, I felt it, and it was overwhelming. So, I have an angel, in Tamara. So, and I'm really lucky to be part of you guys' family. So,
Oh, we love you.
love you guys.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And I was going to say, sometimes we need that reminder from other people. I mean, we only do have our experience, but I think there is a lot to be gained from other people's experience. And like my wife, she reminds me that my mom's not far away, and it's more within myself, whether I shut myself off to that or, try and make sense of it, that can kind of push that away, when really if I have a thought, even if it's just a thought, like that's just a reminder that she's not far away.
It's beautiful. I'm reading the comments. Thank you for all the beautiful comments. And I'm going to share my screen again. Spencer and I have co-created a book.
Collaborated, yeah.
Collaborated. We did this together. And Spencer may have done the bulk of the writing in many ways, because I said, let's go back to that 7-year-old child. And what would you say to the world as that 7-year-old child if you had the chance, and what would that look like? I trust you can all see this screen, and this is the book we put together. And it's called Where Are You? I'm just going to walk through, and we've done these beautiful painterly illustrations for it. But this may be the most important page of all. And it says, dedicated to the children who have lost loved ones and deserve answers. I can't imagine what was that like, being 7. And here I was as a grown man having these profound things happen, and you were walking a different path. And I will say this, and I think this is why the book came about. Spencer's become the most compassionate person I know. He's just very kind and very good. And we've come to the same conclusion of love and oneness.
But I understand that, so many people, I'm not so great that my experience is the most horrific thing anyone's ever gone through. It was horrible, but people have their own experiences, and people go through maybe comparatively so much more worse. Yeah. And so my message is, I came to that message by just understanding that we all have things happen to us, and it's just great to have more of an understanding of where people are coming from, and that they kind of carry their own baggage with them, and they're not just, we may feel like the lead role in our own movie, and everyone else is just kind of in the periphery, but everyone is their own lead role in their own movie, and I think understanding that can help bring unity and understanding and compassion.
That's beautiful. So this is dedicated to the children who have lost loved ones, and anybody really who's lost a loved one. Where are you? You left so quickly that I wondered where you went. Are you in the stars? Are you in the flowers and the grass? Are you in the trees? Are you in the scarf that still smells like your hair? Sometimes I wonder if you were ever real. I had a dream of you, but when I woke up, you were still gone. I looked for you on Sunday, but Monday came. Are you in the garden? Are you in the mountains? Are you in the clouds? I remember the banana bread you made and the music you played. Maybe that's where you are, in the music, in those spaces between the notes. I do my best to remember, but then sometimes I wish I could forget. I think I can picture your face, but it feels like it's slipping away. It feels unreal to me the way life was before you left, and yet it's even more unreal how it is now without you. I've looked for you everywhere, yet you still feel so gone, and nothing I do can bring you back. Sometimes, though, when I'm calm and think of you, I can almost feel you, like you're right beside me. Maybe that's where you are, right beside me. Or maybe even closer. Perhaps you're alive within me. Are you alive within me? If so, then you are right here in what I see, in what I touch, in what I hear, and even in what I taste. You are the whisper, not the one I hear in my ears, but the one I hear in my heart, the whisper I feel beyond hearing. That whisper takes me to a place deep within myself, a place where we can meet like a dream. Wow, that's where you are. You're within me. You live in my heart. You are alive in my memory. So you live in everything around me. Yes, now I see you. There you are. You're in the stars, the trees, the flowers, the grass, the scarf, the garden, the sky, the mountains, the music. You are alive within me, and because of that, we're both alive within everything. Now I see you everywhere. Thanks for inspiring me to look. Watch over me, okay? The end, but as you can see here, there is no end.
It's only right now.
It's only right now in this moment. And certainly you have angels, we have angels. And although our experiences have been different, we have come to the same conclusion that we're all connected. We're all one.